Hi everyone. Let's get started with chapter 5 of our book. So, here on page 75, we learn that it's been a couple of days since Jennifer's rape. Ron comes home to where he stays with his mom and her boyfriend, and he finds that the police have already been there. They've taken some shoes and a flashlight. And he sees that the police are basically charging him for this crime. And so he's like, okay, I've got to go take care of this. He doesn't have a car, he has only a bicycle, so he ends up borrowing his neighbor's car but takes his sister with him just in case if dealing with the police take longer than 3 o'clock when his neighbor needs to go to work, his sister can take it back. Um, let's see. And along the way, he also picked up his girlfriend. But in the car, they were very afraid. They didn't say, oh, everything's going to be okay and all this other kind of stuff. They were afraid of what might happen. We learned that he dropped out of school in the ninth grade so that he can go and work and bring home money for his mom. And when he gets there, he looks up on the second floor and he notices a police officer looking at him. And he recognized that as an officer who had followed him before. He's met with Detective Mike, who we already know. They search him and take his utility knife. But he has these what ifs at the top of page 78. He says, I've replayed this scene in my head over and over, wondering if there was any way all of this could have come out differently. What if I had worn a different shirt? What if I hadn't gotten my dates mixed up? What if I refused to talk until I had a lawyer present? I would have a lot of time to think about my situation. That was the last time I walked in anywhere as a free man for the next 11 years. So he's told that he's under arrest. Um, he thought he didn't need a lawyer. He says, I don't need an attorney, sir. I didn't commit this crime and I want to get it straight. He signed a piece of paper waiving his right, indicating I was waiving my rights in front of Detective Lowe. I remember thinking, why would I need a lawyer when I haven't done anything wrong? I just wanted to get this over with so they'd see they'd made a mistake. He was 22 at the time, and so he tells them that night he was with his brother Calvin. They went to a friend's house. He does smoke. Remember, Jennifer remembers smelling cigarette smoke on her rapist. Um, and then about 10:20 that night, they go to the Candlelight Club. And then later on, he meets his friend Janice. And about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, she's going to give him a ride home. What he notices during this interview is that they're not recording anything. And this is 1984. Sometimes back then they didn't do that kind of thing. But even in the late 90s into the 2000s, I have seen cases where they haven't recorded stuff. Or it's really bad quality when we clearly have the equipment for really good audio and visual cameras and recording. And that's important. So here he says at the bottom page 79, but I noticed he wasn't recording the conversation, so I felt that he could be writing down anything. And that is not okay. Police officers should be able to support what is being written. So getting back to Ron's alibi. So they ended up taking another friend home, and then they went back to a boarding house, and then they took another friend home, and then finally Ron gets taken back home at around 4 o'clock in the morning. Mike asks for more details and times and things like that. He does see that his sister is at the station. Detective Lowe questioned him for 3 hours. At the time, down at the bottom of page 80, he says, I wish I had hugged each of them before I went upstairs with the detectives, but the police might have taken it as a sign I knew I was guilty, saying goodbye and all. So even from the very beginning, he's worried about how every little thing he does and says can be misconstrued by the police. He's given a bathroom break, and he keeps wondering, why was this taking so long? Then he recognizes that the detective Sully, who he recognized when he first went into the building, was the cop who had followed him. And as a young kid, he had always wanted to be a cop, but he had seen a cop be very violent with a kid, and he thinks it's the same cop. Um, and then he's shown his shoes, and they say, "Do you recognize these?" And he says, "Yeah, they look like my shoes, but they weren't in that condition." And then they look at the rubber foam, the piece of foam. Um, you see this piece of material. This came from your shoe, and we found it in Jennifer Thompson's apartment the night you raped her. Ron says, "That's because you put it there then. I don't know any Jennifer. I've never been in her apartment." Then they bring up the flashlight. "Well, that's because you stole this from Mary Reynolds and held it to her face when you raped her." And then they tell her, "Jennifer Thompson already identified you. We know it was you." And in this case, they didn't have DNA. It was 1984. DNA doesn't happen until at least the late 80s into the 90s. Um, but think about that. If you know you're innocent and you're being told by police officers your DNA proves that you did this. There's a lot of people who, if you're hours and hours and hours into an interview, they will admit to it, just to have it finished, even if it's not true. And some people have a lower IQ in which they don't really quite understand what they're saying and what it all means. So in Ron's case, he's saying she identified you. Um, they talk about his rap sheet, what happened when he was 16, and he talks about how he had liked a girl. He went into her house late at night. She got scared at the moment, not expecting him, and so his mom pulled a gun out on him. They charged me with breaking and entering with intent to commit rape. Then the charges were dropped, and I thought it was all over. Then the sheriff was looking for him. They said that her name, the young woman's name, was wrong on the documentation, so the police came back for him. So as we can see, this isn't "I'm violently breaking in and I'm violently going to rape you." It was, "Hey, I know this person, I like this person, they kind of like me too. I do something stupid like get drunk and go into their house late at night and scare her, and the parents are unhappy about that." And so his lawyer at the time tells him, "Well, you could get 50 to 95 years for this if it goes to trial. If you plead guilty, you get about 3 years." And so, as we learned in the Staggering Number of Wrongful Convictions article, there's a lot of people who go for misdemeanors and they just plea out, even if they're innocent, because they think that, you know, going to trial could be worse. So he's scared, so he goes ahead and pleads. He does 18 months. He feels like he has no choice. And then he does admit to another breaking and entering. He admits to that. His sisters had told him that they thought he was hanging out with the wrong crowd. And then he talks about Detective Sully. He had already decided I was guilty, and Sully says this to Ron. "You think you're Mr. Big Shot going around town screwing white women, don't ya? We got your ass." So that all goes back to that birth of a nation. The idea that black men are not allowed to date white women. They're not allowed to have sex or anything like that. And so that's what that is right there. That's what that is. But Ron says he's not going to break him, but he also recognizes a lot of the racism in this town. So this is at the bottom of page 84. "I knew they were trying to get me to break, but it wasn't going to be like that. I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I looked Sully real steady in the eye. Like a lot of people in town, he didn't like the fact that I had dated white girls. Sometimes walking around, you could feel the racism like a pilot light always on in the back of people's minds, flickering and just waiting to get turned up." And so at that point, he realizes anything that he says can be used against him. So then they went before the magistrate. He had a bond of $150,000. He talks about being in the jail, how there's a really bad odor. He calls his mom and dad. And then he finds out that he was wrong, that he had gotten his alibi wrong. And at one point, he says this about his mom on page 86. She had the same look on her face that she had years ago when I was 16 years old and the police came for me. A strong black woman, utterly powerless when someone else was making all the rules. And so in our society today, we have a lot of black men who are incarcerated at a very high level. And so you might hear talk about how a lot of kids grow up without their father. And think about that being a lot of single mothers at home having to raise kids on their own, work multiple jobs. Um, and so that's kind of that look that his mom's got there. And then he talks about his siblings growing up. While in jail, you could look forward to visitation in church, and he always liked to sing. He did have a cellmate named Fear Now, who he had 64 counts of break-in and entering, and at one point he tried to kill himself, but Ron talked him down from it. But then he finds out later that the cellmate was trying to make a deal and say, oh yeah, I overheard Ron talking in his sleep that he actually did what he did. And he had made the mistake of telling his cellmate that about the lineup. And remember when we looked at that PowerPoint from John Grisham about reasons why wrongful convictions happen, that's one of those reasons. Snitches, jailhouse snitches, because 64 counts of breaking and entering, that's huge. So if you want to get some of that cleared, that's going to happen. And then he has the lineup, and he mistakenly says, I'll kill you instead of I cut you. He's scared that he's going to get picked in that situation. Mary didn't pick him. She actually picked number 4, who was a college student who lived not far from the apartments, who wasn't a real suspect. And then his lawyer says that he knows about the alibi mix-up, and that's going to be a problem. Then we have the probable cause hearing, where his bond went up. He had a birthday while in jail. And then there's the trial. And so the judge says, no, we're not going to hear about how the second victim could not identify Ron. And then, no, you can't bring in a memory expert. And then his lawyer's like, do you want to plead out on this? Are you sure? And Ron wanted to take the stand. He wanted to clear his name. He wanted to talk. But his lawyer said, ooh, that might not be good. And that might not always be good, especially if you know your client isn't going to respond well to a prosecutor questioning them on the stand. And Ron says, no, I don't want to plead out. And remember we talked about how Jennifer and her sister, they thought that it was really weird that he was just always silent. They were expecting him to be menacing and dangerous looking and stuff like that, and he wasn't. He just was composed. Well, he talks about that. He's like, I just stayed silent while they all spoke lies to me. And in response, I adopted the guarded look I learned long ago when dealing with the authorities, when it seemed like they could do or say whatever they wanted regardless. And then we find out at the end that he is found guilty and sentenced to life plus 50 years. Okay, so that is chapter 5. I don't have anything extra right now to show you guys for chapter 5, so move on to the video for chapter 6.